So I sort of have multiple prongs to my career, and one of the major prongs is my work in the mental health and relationship space. I went back to school and I got a master's in psychology so that I would be able to like talk and understand just like mental health struggles and issues from a broader perspective other than my own. Um, and my original nonfiction book is called Overthinking About You, and it is about the intersection between mental health and romantic relationships and how much the two interplay, and how when you struggle with your mental health, forming, adaptive romantic relationships can be difficult, but not impossible. And here's what I've learned, and here's how I've gotten better at it. And so that book came out in 2022, and that was like a really wonderful experience. I poured a lot of myself and my previous shame into it. I have a very storied dating history, and then during the process of writing that book, I got engaged, and then 6 months later, my fiance walked out on me with like little to no explanation. And so I had this very bizarre experience of having to use everything I had learned in this book to help me heal. And then I also had to rewrite the last chapter, because the original last chapter was about us. I had interviewed him for it. It was sort of like, hey, I figured it all out and now I'm getting married and you can too. And instead it sort of became a chapter called How to Not Give Up. And that like I had faced my worst fear, like the thing I thought I would never be able to survive, which was, getting so close to marriage only to have the rug ripped out from under me completely. But because I had done all of this work, it didn't destroy me, which was sort of the whole thesis of the book from the very beginning. But I was kind of the guinea pig that proved that that was true. And so I really have a very, intimate relationship with that book. I shared parts of myself I had never shared with the wider public before in that format, but it felt like I needed to. And then from there, I came up with the idea to write a book about modern marriage. And so that is my book that's coming out in just a couple of weeks, called I Do, I Think, Conversations About Modern Marriage. And that is a book that is basically sort of exploring, now that we don't need to get married anymore, why do we still do it? What is so valuable about this relationship, this relationship that is often, you know, given much more importance in society than pretty much any other relationship. It's the way that our societal structures are formed. And how do we separate the more patriarchal, seedier elements that is the history of marriage from what modern marriage can be today, if that is something that you're interested in? And if it is something you're interested in, how do we go about doing it really thoughtfully so that we set ourselves up for success, but also accept that not all marriages are meant to last forever? Part of the book is stories of people I interviewed. So there's a lot of expert interviews, from divorce lawyers to therapists to financial advisors, sex therapists. But I also just told people's individual stories. And one person I interviewed, she grew up in a very traditional family, a Muslim family, and she was always knew she was going to have an arranged marriage, but her mother wanted her to do it sooner than she anticipated. She sort of got engaged to someone right out of high school, but then they had a compromise that she wouldn't have to marry him until she graduated. And through those like 3 years, she kept saying to her parents, this is not the right person for me. This is not the person that I'm compatible with. Please don't make me marry him. And they were like, sorry, this is the right person because he checks these certain things that we are looking for in your spouse. And the personality aspect of him was not as important to them as, that he had a good job, that he was from a certain family, all of these things. And so she went ahead with the marriage and had to move across the country to be with her new husband. And within 6 months, she was back home and they were getting divorced. And so it was a very interesting experience. I mean, I can't say I only spoke to her, but I would believe for the entire family because, if they had listened to her input earlier, they wouldn't have like a 21, 22-year-old divorcee, where divorce in that community carries so much stigma. We still find that divorce has stigmatized in broader Western culture, but for certain certain cultures, especially the more religious ones, it is like, especially for women, it is like, oh, will anyone ever touch me with a 10-foot pole after this experience? But she was so unhappy in her marriage that she was willing to take that risk. And then what I found really interesting was that she then wanted to get married again, and she wanted another arranged marriage. This was what was very normal in her culture. And what she said though was, this time I get to decide, though. You can help me in my search, and I welcome your help. I want your help, but I get to say yes or no in the end. And her parents agreed, and she went on to have a second arranged marriage, and she's very happily married now. So my novel Save the Date is based on a joke my dad made following my own broken engagement. As I mentioned earlier, I got left 6 months after getting engaged with like really no explanation, and I came home to New York. It was 2020, and it was like the midst of the pandemic. So the first week home, I'm in a mask. No one could touch me. It was just like so tragic, right? And then my dad started kind of made a joke and was like, well, what if you just find someone else to marry you on the date that you had been planning to get married? And I was like, Dad, that's absolutely bonkers. A real person shouldn't do that, but it is a great idea for a book. And so the concept of Save the Date is basically that a couples therapist gets abruptly left, which really blows up her personal life, but also her professional credibility, right? Because how could she not have known that her own partner didn't love her anymore when she gives relationship advice for a living? And she's also sort of a YouTube famous TikTok therapist. So I'm sort of pulling from my own experience of having to share this whole thing publicly as well as dealing with it privately. And so she decides, to save face professionally, and also to prove to herself that she doesn't need to give up on love, that she's going to find a new groom in time for her original wedding. And through a series of hijinks, she meets a great guy, but he won't agree to that plan because it's a bonkers plan, and who's willing to do that? And then she finds someone who does agree, and it becomes this love triangle of like, but who's actually right for her? And it was, obviously sparked by personal experience, but then what goes on to happen to my protagonist throughout is all fiction and fun and love. It was so joyful to get to really play in the romance genre and the rom-com genre. I named the protagonist Emma after my best friend, who is also now a therapist, and and so Emma Moskowitz is sort of our lead. The whole book is written third person from her point of view. She is very clearly sort of based on me. You'll see in the cover of the book, the artist even depicted her looks a lot like me, and her family is very clearly based off of my family dynamic. Obviously, when you're having fun in comedy, you heighten everyone. You play with things, you poke fun, but I'm super close with my family, and so that's a huge part of the book is sort of her family supporting her through this. And then the guy that she originally really hits it off with is a character named Will. He's loosely based off of my current husband, someone I met a few months after my broken engagement, and who weathered that storm with me, only for us to then build our own lives and future together. And Will in the book is a podcast producer, and he's someone who is you know very funny, makes Emma feel very comfortable, that she can make all the jokes she wants to make, that she can be her true self. They have like kind of that intense chemistry from the get-go. But once she sort of shares her plan with him, which is called Operation Save the Date, Operation Save My Date in the book, he is like, why would anyone agree to do that with you? Like, why would I want to marry you just so that you can like sub me in for someone else? That's not what relationships are, and that's very strange, and I would rather just date you the regular way. But by that point, she's like much too attached to this idea, both on a personal level, and also it's a public idea at this point. And so she has to kind of like continue this path because of all this outside pressure from her fan base, but also her family and her sister sort of being like, if you don't go through with this, you could just end up a few years down the line without a husband still, like you owe it to yourself to go after what you want, because marriage is something she really values. And so they break up, but then Will, being a podcast producer, is like, I would like to make a podcast with you about Operation Save My Date. I want to follow this trajectory. And so that's sort of how they stay in each other's lives, as she then gets paired up with her brother-in-law's kind of friend acquaintance, Matt, who recently got divorced himself. And so he's someone who loved being married, but unfortunately, his ex wife had a one night stand, and he couldn't get over that, so they divorced. And so this idea of Operation Save My Date really appealed to him, because he didn't want to go out there and date. He just wanted the stability and structure of being married again. And so he agrees to go kind of through this process with Emma. And then I won't say what happens next.